In the 30th year of the Meiji era in Tokyo, the government implemented a policy of expelling supernatural creatures, demons, and ghosts. Our protagonist, known as the Demon Slayer of the theater troupe, could crush opponents with his bare hands. He was performing a show where he destroyed a cricket spirit with overwhelming power in front of hundreds of spectators. With such terrifying strength, not only the audience but even the theater troupe leader called him a monster. One day, like any other day, people were scrambling to buy food supplies amid a shortage of goods. The protagonist was also strolling to buy his favorite liquor. When the liquor store owner misunderstood that he had a venereal disease because of the black marks on his body, he suddenly remembered moments of physical and mental torture by a man holding an elegant baton engraved with the letter M. Pushing away those painful memories, the protagonist encountered a group of villagers who were intending to beat a fierce cat because they thought it was a demon. One of them ordered the Demon Slayer brother to eliminate the cat immediately, but he instantly refused to hurt this poor little cat, causing the crowd to leave in frustration. Life is unpredictable after sparing the small cat. That night he encountered a huge cat. As usual, he sent the monster away with a single punch. Wanting to rest after his performance, our protagonist was followed by a shadow, a woman in a maid outfit with a strange birdcage in her hand. To block his path, the maid pulled out a long rifle with a sharp bayonet. But the maid's hands couldn't be faster than the Demon Slayer brother. He was too quick, approached her closely, and poured liquor into her gun barrel. Not giving up, the nimble maid swiftly attacked him with a sharp bayonet, and they quickly fell into combat. But the brother still narrowly won with his overwhelming strength. At this moment, a voice spoke, saying it would forgive the Demon Slayer's rudeness. The voice came from the birdcage and began to reveal many truths about the protagonist. He was originally a hybrid creature between human and demon, but the demonic part was gradually dominating and corroding him due to the excessive number of demons forcibly implanted into his body. Using the demonic part to destroy supernatural creatures increasingly weakened his sanity and depleted his lifespan, which is why he also refrained from killing when off stage. Surprisingly, the talking birdcage also requested him to make a deal to extend his lifespan by killing the talking birdcage itself. The cage contained the head of the immortal beauty Rindo Anna, a unique and special specimen in legend. She maintained the appearance of a 14-year-old and 3 months for 947 years, and the attendant accompanying her was the maid Shizuku. Explaining why the cage only contained the head despite the immortal's ability to heal wounds instantly was because Rindo was beheaded by a demon. Wounds inflicted by demons couldn't heal immediately, and she should have died, but the attacker was also a half-demon, so Rindo luckily avoided death. Nevertheless, the attacker took her body away, causing her great suffering as she couldn't reconnect with it. Not only that, the masked attacker only allowed her to see the foreign master holding the elegant baton engraved with the letter M. This was the same evil man who grafted demons into our protagonist's body. At this moment, people from the theater troupe also began to come out, so they had to leave the theater grounds to find another place to talk. On the way, the Demon Slayer brother finally revealed his name as Shunichi Suguru. The purpose that made Shunichi, who was once wandering, deliberately allow the troop leader to take him in was truly terrifying. He knew that using the demonic part inside him too much would cause him to die early, so Shunichi wanted to die happily, dying right in the theater where hundreds of bloodthirsty spectators cheered for him. But that wasn't all, because when he was consumed by the demon and lost control, he would also switch to a mode where he slaughtered all those arrogant spectators. It was a situation that balanced both supernatural creatures and humans, a highly educational drama that he wanted to convey through art. This made Rindo exclaim that he had exceeded the category of human beings. Rindo once again wanted Shunichi to accept her exchange, but surprisingly, he disagreed. He didn't accept that she chose death when there was still a way to find her body, even though he also wanted to extend his lifespan. He made a deal that he would pursue the dangerous old man with a baton to the distant place to retrieve her body, still with the condition of extending his own lifespan. To seal the deal, Rindo began to reveal a way for Shunichi to live longer, eating a part of her body. But she certainly wouldn't let him eat important parts of her body, so he could only eat her saliva, blood, mucus, and tears. In this situation, Shunichi chose saliva and had a passionate kiss with the beautiful immortal Rindo. In 1898, in the remote eastern part of France, a father and son went deer hunting together. Unlike the barren father who was shooting a gun, the son Ron was only focusing on mushrooms. The deer was caught, But not because it was shot. The father was not familiar with shooting and only wanted to try out the gun given by the mayor. Pretending to hunt with guns helped the father and son pretend to be closer to humans, avoiding being shunned as vampires. At this time, humans began to want to exterminate vampires, and even the father had once almost been killed by a hunter. The father had taken the hunter's weapon, a silver stake, and kept it in the cellar to avoid harming his family. But unfortunately, today the cellar lock had been broken, and the stake in the cellar was covered in boiling vampire blood. He frantically searched for every family member. His beloved son had been following him all this time. The eldest son was at home, the butler was also healthy. The little daughter was happily singing with the maid. Only one person remained. That was the beautiful lady sitting in a chair with a large wound on her chest. The red blood fell like beautiful rose petals, deepening the Baron's sorrow as he tried to tolerate humans for his family's sake. Despite such tragedy, the press did not spare his family. Despite the brutal murder of the lady, they hoped the evil perpetrator would not be prosecuted by law because they believed vampires had no human rights. The Baron's family and their allies had long signed a treaty not to drink human blood in exchange for human rights. The Baron even regularly took his children to church. Yet assassins still killed his wife just to warn them they could never be equal to humans. As soon as the shadow of the Baron appeared, the inhumane press immediately surrounded him to tear apart the information. Only the 14-year-old journalist girl Kuber truly believed that the Baron's family deserved justice, and that the police stopping the investigation was discrimination. Sympathizing with this, the Baron also revealed that his family had hired two famous detectives specializing in monster investigations to investigate the case themselves. The names of these two detectives were not unfamiliar: the immortal Rindo, also known as the Birdcage Messenger, and the Demon Slayer brother, Shunichi Suguru. The two famous detectives had solved many cases in Europe, and now they, along with the maid Shizuku, were cheerfully chatting in a horse-drawn carriage on their way to the Baron's castle to solve the tragic murder case of the lady. Upon arrival, it seemed like our Shunichi wanted to skimp on paying the foolish carriage driver. Although Rindo could read the driver's family situation, including how his wife nagged him and forbade him from drinking, our protagonist still intended to shortchange the French driver by 1 franc and made the driver go in to demand payment from the Baron's family. The Baron's family politely invited him into the living room and paid for the carriage. At this point, only the Baron and his 2 sons remained in the room, along with the 3 people from the detective team. Our protagonist and Rindo began to introduce themselves, but the conversation gradually turned into a situation where people were talking past each other as the Baron and his sons kept staring at the maid Shizuku. Only when Shizuku took the luggage up to the room did the Baron and his 2 sons realize in amazement that Rindo was not the tall girl in the maid outfit, but the birdcage. They were even more shocked when they realized Rindo was still alive despite only having her head left. After briefly mentioning the loss of her body, Rindo immediately asked the Baron to recount the process of discovering the body, even though the information was quite clearly published in the newspaper. The Baron painfully recounted that the family had 5 members, including the couple and 3 children, 2 sons and 1 youngest daughter. Besides that, there were 2 servants, the butler, who had been a long-time friend of the Baron, and the innocent maid. The lady, formerly human, always maintained a hobby of repairing furniture, and the house often resonated with the sound of hammering. Her room was also decorated with 2 real swords, just like her son's room. Rindo suddenly asked about the corpse. The Baron honestly replied that it was buried because vampire corpses decompose more easily than normal people. Fortunately, there was a camera in the house, so he had taken a picture of his wife's final moments. With that image, Rindo immediately deduced that the murder weapon was a stake and that the killer must have struck when the lady was asleep, as there were no signs of resistance. Besides that, she investigated that the holy water bottle left at the scene had a small blood stain, proving that the holy water was sprinkled on the lady after she died. This created 7 suspicions for Rindo, and she asked Shunichi to help her present them to the Baron. First, why didn't Lady Hannah wake up despite vampires having very sensitive senses? Second, why did the killer break into the house at midnight, although everyone knew vampires were much stronger at night than during the day? Third, why did the killer leave behind the holy water bottle, even though it was a small, easily portable item? Fourth, why did the killer know exactly the location of the silver stake in the storage room and the lady's room, as well as her schedule? Fifth, why did the killer have to return the murder weapon to the storage room? Sixth was what concerned Rindo the most. But our protagonist interrupted because they had used up all fingers to support the presentation and still weren't finished. While negotiating the next presentation method, the Baron's youngest daughter also tiptoed over, was startled by our protagonist's actions, burst into tears, and ran away. The dinner with the Baron's family was very sumptuous. The delicious dishes placed before Shunichi and the foolish carriage driver made Shunichi eat and drink very happily. In contrast, only a bowl of fresh blood was placed before the Baron's family. Every month, they had to regularly consume fresh blood to maintain their strength. The Baron's two sons felt very uncomfortable with these two strange detectives because the younger brother had seen how Shunichi tried to skimp on the carriage driver's payment. Initially, out of curiosity about the two foreign detectives, the younger brother secretly followed them, only to witness our protagonist grumbling and trying to swindle the foolish driver. Even more surprisingly, the formidable Shunichi knew full well that the younger brother was hiding at the top of the dilapidated tower, giving him another moment of astonishment. Despite demonstrating such talent, the eldest son still believed these two talented detectives were just two frauds, but the foolish carriage driver believed in them and kept asking why Rindo knew about his wife. Rindo calmly replied that the answer lay in his own clothes, analyzing from the carefully sewn buttons and the thoroughly washed belly area of the shirt. It could be seen that the carriage driver's wife was a very meticulous person, but also from the detail that the belly of the shirt was washed thoroughly. It could be seen that this was caused by the driver often drinking alcohol and dropping food on his shirt. The shirt he was wearing hadn't been washed for about a week, but wasn't dirty, suggesting that his wife was angry with him, so he hadn't been drinking during that time. The meticulous wife was too frustrated with her husband's drinking and staining clothes. Those were Rindo's conclusions. The carriage driver, hearing these extremely accurate deductions, burst into tears, which also shifted the thinking of the Baron's eldest son, reminding him of the famous English detective Sherlock Holmes. But Rindo modestly said that she couldn't compare to that genius and also didn't want to meet him. Suddenly, she abruptly asked the Baron more about the case. She wondered if the family had dinner together on the night of the murder, just like today. After the Baron's affirmative answer, she continued to ask what time the meal ended. The Baron replied that it was 12:30, which was 1 hour before the body was found. Continuing the investigation into the behavior of all family members, Lady Hannah showed no unusual behavior. She wanted to go to her room to rest after dinner. The Baron went to the library on the second floor to talk with his eldest son, while the youngest daughter also sat in the room playing with toys. After more than an hour, all three went out to the main hall. The Baron went to the storage room to get his hunting rifle as usual. At this time, there was nothing unusual in the storage room. Upon leaving the house, the Baron met his younger son who wanted to follow his father into the forest to look at trees. Then the father and son went hunting in the forest. The father fired shots deep in the forest but didn't hit anything. Returning to the eldest son, he went back to his room to read alone when his father went hunting. When interviewing the younger brother about where he went during the 30 minutes right after dinner, his attitude was very suspicious. He was irritated and snappy because he thought he was being suspected. But Rindo didn't just suspect him, all family members could be the culprit. It took the younger brother a while before he answered that he was in his room the whole time and didn't hear any noise. Next was the interview with the innocent maid. She timidly replied that she followed her daily schedule. At 12:30, she cleaned in the kitchen, and at 1 o'clock, she went to the laundry room. On the way, she met the youngest sister who was bored, so she took the little girl along to sing while doing laundry. During that time, she only went to the bathroom once, which took 1 or 2 minutes. Finally, the butler said he was always in the basement, working alone, and like the younger brother, didn't hear any noise. Upon hearing all the testimonies, the beautiful detective Rindo immediately concluded that only the elder brother Cloris and the butler could be the culprits. The father reacted violently, arguing that it couldn't possibly be someone in the house who harmed the lady. At that moment, the youngest sister burst into tears and left. The crime-solving dinner had to be temporarily paused. On the way back to the room, Shunichi, the maid Shizuku, and Rindo were chatting. Rindo continued to be troubled by the last two inconsistencies. She asked Shizuku to monitor the two servants because none of the Baron's family members had burn marks on their hands from touching the silver stake. Therefore, the two servants were the most suspicious people. Just as Shizuku left, the eldest son suddenly appeared. He insisted that he wasn't the culprit. Immediately, he lunged forward to attack Shizuku, but since she didn't feel pain, he immediately lunged to strangle Shunichi. Despite being threatened, Shunichi still wore a gentle smile without any anger. The eldest son threw Shunichi hard to the ground and left. This threat made it impossible for Shunichi not to suspect that the eldest son was the evil culprit. But once again, Shizuku insisted it wasn't him and wanted to find out what it was. Back to the scene in the dining room, the maid Shizuku was standing with the two servants of the Baron's family. After some social conversation, Shizuku also asked about the hardships of the two servants. The butler smiled lightly and said that although it was tiring because he had to do everything at night, after 20 years, he had gotten used to it. The innocent maid still couldn't get used to this night work, but was extremely skilled at drawing animal blood. After the conversation, just as the butler was about to leave, he was stopped by Shizuku. He used the excuse of meeting the Baron, but the innocent maid informed him that the Baron had gone into the forest with Shunichi to find that thing. The Baron went with Shunichi and Rindo in the forest, sharing his feelings about not wanting any more family members to die. He also asked Rindo to reinvestigate because the method of the crime was similar to how vampire hunters operate, so it couldn't be a family member. He also talked about immortal creatures that don't age and cannot die. Rindo calmly said that such creatures would certainly die if killed by demons, though demons weren't the strongest species due to poor defense and stupidity. At that moment, the Baron keenly realized that the demon and the immortal were the two people in front of him. Suddenly, from somewhere, an arrow shot straight at the Baron's neck. But since it was just an ordinary arrow, it couldn't kill him, and the Baron darted like a shuttle to where the arrow shooter was. The shooter panicked as the Baron pinned him firmly to the ground. Fortunately for him, the two detectives arrived and intervened just in time before the Baron could deal with him. Upon further investigation of the man, the two detectives concluded that he couldn't be the culprit as he had just arrived from Germany. The reason this man came was for revenge because he heard that his friend Hugo, who went to assassinate the Baron the day before, had been killed by him. Although they were friends, he didn't even know his friend had a silver stake, so he was released because he certainly couldn't be the culprit. The culprit was the one Rindo had deduced. Now they just needed to return to the castle to announce it. Everyone in the Baron's house sat in the library listening to Rindo begin to solve the case. Recalling her 7 suspicions, Rindo calmly reasoned. First, why didn't Lady Hannah wake up despite vampires having very sensitive senses? Second, why did the killer break into the house at midnight, although everyone knew vampires were much stronger at night than during the day? Third, why did the killer leave behind the holy water bottle, even though it was a small, easily portable item? Fourth, why did the killer know exactly the location of the silver stake in the storage room and the ladies' room, as well as her schedule? The killer must have been very familiar with the house and the Baron's family's living habits. Fifth, why did the killer have to return the silver stake to the storage room? The 5 points above were enough to prove that the killer could only be someone in the house. Coming to the 6th point, the sound no one present in the house heard the sound of the stake being driven into the victim. Although the sound of driving a stake would certainly be much louder than the sound of hammering a nail, eliminating many scenarios that couldn't have happened. Rindo concluded that the murder weapon wasn't the silver stake, but something else of the same size. Because using a hammer to drive the silver stake into the lady's chest would create sounds similar to when the lady was repairing furniture, it wouldn't arouse suspicion from people in the house. But strangely, the killer still insisted on not using a hammer because the weapon he used was something much more fragile than silver. If hit with a hammer, it would break. To further convince, Rindo mentioned the 7th suspicious point. The glass bottle left at the scene was dirty from the inside. Cleaning the outside couldn't make it clean. This proved that the bottle didn't contain liquid from the beginning, but was just fake evidence thrown back by the killer. But there were clear traces of holy water on the victim's body while the bottle was completely empty. So what was the reason? That was the weapon itself. The weapon was a stake made of frozen holy water. After committing the crime with that ice stake, the killer broke the lock to the storage room after the Baron went to get his gun, pouring the victim's blood onto the silver stake to create false evidence. After her logical analysis, the female detective turned to ask Shunichi if he knew what that meant. Our protagonist responded with very suggestive words, talking about how the killer wanted to cheat by creating a false crime time. Finding the real crime time narrowed down the number of suspects. Based on the 5 conditions Rindo deduced, all suspects could be eliminated to find the exact culprit. First, the ability to commit the actual crime from 12:30 to 1 o'clock. Second, creating an alibi from 1 o'clock to 1:30. Third, having a few minutes of freedom to throw the silver stake into the storage after the Baron checked it. Fourth, being strong enough to stab the stake into the lady's chest. Finally, being quick enough to finish off the lady without waking her up. With the first three conditions, 3 suspects could be narrowed down. But with the fourth and fifth conditions, the culprit now had to reveal himself. It was the younger brother. He stubbornly argued that he wasn't the culprit because he couldn't touch the silver stake without getting injured. But Rindo immediately exposed his trick, which was that vampires recover extremely quickly. He had cut off his burned fingers with the decorative sword in his room and recovered immediately afterward. Hearing this, the younger brother went almost insane, lunging at the 2 detectives to kill them to silence them. But he certainly was no match for Shunichi, who caught him easily as soon as he lunged forward. Rindo could only pout, saying that he didn't let her finish speaking before revealing himself. Asking Shizuku to hold the cage containing Rindo, Shunichi engaged in combat with the Baron's younger son. Not wasting a minute, he threw the boy out the window and then jumped out himself, warning the boy that if he hurt Rindo, it would be very difficult to handle. In the library, Rindo exposed the cold-blooded younger brother's crime plan. This was a plan carefully thought out from a week before. Hugo was contacted by him to assassinate his father while also taking the silver stake from him. He also meticulously stole holy water from church visits with his father, then froze it in the shape of the stake's cover and attacked his mother. Rindo also exposed the motive for the crime, his hatred for humans and lack of support for the Allies. The more she spoke, the more the father lost his composure, collapsing in disbelief. He gradually sank down, not knowing what to do. Rindo told him to calm down, that Shunichi would handle everything. On his side, Shunichi was handling the problem by beating the younger brother to a pulp. The younger brother still stubbornly insisted that all beings are equal but vampires are superior. To make the superior younger brother come to his senses, Shunichi had to activate his Demon Slayer mode to give him a few sobering punches. He began to introduce himself as a hybrid demon specially trained in the monster hunting unit in Japan during the era of exorcising supernatural beings. Hearing this, the arrogant younger brother realized he couldn't be tough anymore. The wounds on his body couldn't heal. Despite launching into a relentless attack, the younger brother still couldn't turn the tables. He couldn't turn the tables, but he still stubbornly claimed he was better than others. This only earned him a finishing kick from Shunichi. In the house, the Baron was shocked by what had just happened. He thought his wife's ideals would guide his family, but instead pushed his family to a tragic end. On the way to say goodbye, the journalist Annie came wanting an interview. Rindo also said a few words to the Baron about starting his life over again because he was also an immortal, then asked if he had met the man with the baton marked with the letter M yet. The Baron said that man had just left the week before. Annie quickly asked Shunichi about his thoughts on the case. He just smiled and replied that the Baron had lost his wife 3 times, and after the death of this 3rd wife, it would be his turn. Meanwhile, Eric the Phantom of the Opera was being tied up on a luxurious boat. The person who tied him on this ship was the handsome blonde master thief Lupin. The purpose of this dizzyingly handsome thief was to invite him to participate in the heist of the Night Jewel on the penultimate night at Phileas Fogg's mansion, a legendarily impenetrable estate. Even more complicated was that Sherlock Holmes was also in London, making this operation fail before it even began. Nevertheless, Lupin was extremely confident, saying that he would succeed. Hearing this, Eric also agreed to participate in this impossible mission. The handsome master thief sent an open letter to Phileas's house, attracting many detectives to prevent the crime of the master thief, among whom the Eastern detective couple certainly couldn't be missing. The 3 members of the detective team were going to a baton shop to investigate. The shop owner chatted openly, asking about the user, happily guessing that he was about to make a sale. But as soon as the cage was lifted to reveal Rindo's head, he was so shocked that his eyes went white, and he fell back unconscious. All 3 took the shop owner's customer ledger and happily left the store. They hadn't gone far when they were stopped by 2 masked men. They demanded the 3 return the customer list from that store. The 3 were surprised and asked if they were police, but were surprised to hear that they claimed the police here couldn't possibly match their abilities. Sensing a fight about to happen, Shunichi asked Shizuku to hold the cage for him so he could prepare for combat. Both sides assumed fighting positions when suddenly a police whistle sounded. Real police arrived, and everyone was handcuffed and taken to the station. On the horse-drawn carriage to the station, they sat with 2 brothers who had been arrested for petty theft. Surprisingly, not only could Rindo deduce, but the man arrested with them also guessed that what the 2 thieves had stolen was a porcelain vase. It turned out to be Sherlock Holmes and his assistant Watson. Both had also been invited by the Phileas family to solve the case. Next to Rindo, a strange man appeared. He was a magician. At that moment, a seductive lady greeted him, and also greeted the man with the baton marked with the letter M, whom she called Professor. The horse-drawn carriage carrying the prisoners from earlier drove straight through the gates of Phileas's house. On the carriage, the four-person detective team got off and entered the mansion. The astute detective Sherlock noticed that entering the house required crossing a bridge. Inside the hall, both the east and west sides were museums containing materials collected by the mansion's owner from around the world. Among treasures from all over the world, the detectives couldn't help but wonder what was so valuable that would make the thief Lupin risk so much. Meanwhile, Lupin and his assistant Eric were discussing their plan to steal the diamond. Eric carefully mentioned the four detectives and the birdcage he had encountered in the mansion. Lupin was only excited about meeting the female detective. While Eric reproached him for sending that declaration letter, Lupin just smiled mysteriously, saying it was a matter of courtesy. Mr. Phileas first finally appeared, smiling and greeting the detectives present. His attitude was extremely calm, even when seeing Rindo's disembodied head, and he gently understood why they were known as detectives specializing in monster investigations. He also assessed that Lupin had destructive power no different from a real monster, which was very suitable for the detective's expertise. Sherlock Holmes, however, felt that hiring two detectives to investigate Lupin was excessive. Rindo, not to be outdone, said that just she alone was more than enough to solve the problem. Holmes didn't give in, sarcastically asking how a disembodied head like her would have enough power to handle it. Rindo replied that all one needed was a brain to be a detective. The verbal combat was so intense that Holmes forgot his work, prompting Dr. Watson to remind Holmes to ask about the case information. Lupin's letter sent to Phileas clearly stated that he would come to steal the night jewel between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. on January 19th. It was a precious 80-carat black diamond that had never been publicly displayed, currently kept in the basement of the mansion, a place surrounded on all sides by water. All sides were enclosed by rivers and canals, especially the south side, which had a 5-foot underground canal large enough for an adult to pass through. Holmes immediately asked the butler to block the passage to that canal. Besides the enormous number of 20 guards and 80 police officers, along with the aforementioned detective team, there was also Inspector Ganem from France and 2 representatives from Lloyd's Security Consulting Department. Mentioning these 2 representatives made Lupin weary, as they were representatives of an insurance company with a 200-year history, undaunted by anything and using absolute power to protect their clients' insured assets. The company had a total of 7 representatives who wore white clothes and carried code names like Clown, but rated by level of strength. Lupin had only met number 6 and was haunted by half his life. Today, the 2 representatives arriving at Phileas's house were number 5, Renho, and number 7, Fatima. Renho openly showed his displeasure with Rindo and Shunichi because they weren't human, as well as being the most potential threat to insurance companies. Shunichi keenly noticed that Renho, although appearing rough, seemed to be avoiding going down to the basement, to the point where the girl number 7, Fatima, had to beg and pull him down. Walking on the bridge through the spacious basement, 2 guards began unlocking the door. Mr. Phileas used his secret key to completely open the basement door. The basement, formerly used as a punishment room, now housed Phileas's sophisticated safe. Opening the safe's complex lock, everyone had to marvel at the sophistication of the precious diamond. The diamond, excavated from the 14th century, was engraved with mystical words. Red dawn like blood, purple dusk like a corpse, night moon shining. Do not look at ugly me, for in my body there is a wolf. This immediately reminded Renho of the legend of the jewel from southern Germany, where a tribe of dwarfs was exterminated by werewolves. They took revenge by creating 2 things. 1 was an unbreakable jewel, and 2 was a sophisticated safe that enemies couldn't open. Renho firmly promised to protect the jewel to the end. Meanwhile, at an association, a red-haired lady and her accomplices were very annoyed with Lupin planning to steal the item they were also planning to steal. This group had previously encountered Rindo and Shizuku. The detective team realized that infiltrating the basement was nearly impossible and began to consider that Lupin would disguise himself as one of the people present here. Holmes instructed Mr. Phileas to follow the planned strategy, while Shunichi anxiously asked if Rindo had any plan yet. She just smiled mysteriously, saying her plan might seem stupid, hinting at Ishikawa Gomen, making Shunichi could only blink in contemplation. Shunichi started rambling about losing all his luggage and how important it was to prevent theft at home. Before Shizuku could get angry, Shunichi was distracted by the sound of a potato vendor. He ran out to buy a portion to taste, while Shizuku helped Rindo ask for directions to the wax museum. Dr. Watson dragged his feet up the stairs to find Sherlock Holmes leisurely reading documents. Watson politely asked if Holmes was busy, but Holmes cheerfully said he had finished all his work. This surprised Watson as to why they weren't discussing the plan to protect Mr. Phileas's house tonight. In response was Holmes' calm attitude, saying the opponent was the attacking side, and Mr. Phileas's side already had too many guards. Watson surprisingly asked if Holmes didn't trust the guards, but Holmes just mysteriously said that was yesterday's matter, today was different, and he was also smiling, saying he was currently very happy. The prospect of him and Lupin facing off like a chess match truly excited him. But interrupting that excitement was Mycroft entering to make an announcement. Seeing Holmes on the chair instead of greeting his brother, Mycroft irritably asked who he was. Holmes sarcastically replied, "Don't you recognize your own brother?" Mycroft became even more irritated, saying that although identical, the person in the chair wasn't his brother. He said he had seen his brother cut his nails the last time they met 3 days ago, but the nails of the person sitting there were very long. Holmes laughed, saying that couldn't prove the person in front of him wasn't Holmes, but there was someone who could prove it. The real Holmes walked in. Holmes in the chair remained very confident introducing himself, but Holmes standing at the door frankly asked, "You're Lupin, aren't you?" With that, Lupin tore off the mask on his face and gave a mysterious smile. Back to Shunichi, who had finished eating potatoes and was with Shizuku and Rindo at the wax museum. He couldn't help but wonder why they had to visit a wax museum in London. Shizuku explained to him that there was a special exhibition room called the Room of Horror, where very pitiful puppets were displayed. Shunichi said he had seen plenty of things that looked like puppets, which made the maid Shizuku crack her knuckles, ready to give him a few punches. Shunichi quickly changed the subject, asking Rindo if she wanted to go to Holmes's house. Strangely, he was met with prolonged silence, which worried him, so he pulled up the curtain covering the cage. Inside the cage suddenly appeared a blue parrot. It turned out our clueless Shunichi had mistakenly taken a real birdcage. For this blunder, Shizuku didn't hesitate to give him a punch. Inside Sherlock Holmes's room, an intense debate was also taking place. Holmes warned that Lupin's chances of winning were almost zero, but Lupin didn't rush to reply, instead asking Holmes if he knew what a key was for. Holmes replied it was to lock something, but Lupin just sneered and said that a key was for unlocking. He was confident that if Forrest could open it, there was no reason he couldn't open it. With a confident face, he bid farewell to Watson and Holmes, promising to see them again as he jumped out the window onto a horse-drawn carriage racing past. Eric, driving that carriage, kindly asked Lupin if he had talked with Holmes yet. The blonde-haired man cheerfully said they had even had tea together, and he had successfully planted 2 seeds. Planning to wander around before train time, the two nearly crashed straight into Shizuku, fortunately braking sharply to avoid her. Lupin jumped down, gently asking what she was looking for. Shizuku, emotionless, asked if he had seen any cage, and receiving a negative answer, politely left. But Lupin wouldn't let her leave. He followed, inviting her onto the carriage, so all 3 went together with Eric driving. Shunichi was also looking for the birdcage when he suddenly met Annie again, who was planning to go for an interview. Back to Holmes's group, they saw Eric with a strange mask. They quickly guessed that Eric must be one of the phantoms of the opera, but didn't know exactly which opera house. For Mycroft and Watson, they were more curious about why Lupin would risk coming to meet Holmes. Holmes replied that it was the rule of gentlemen that no gentleman lies about how they play. Mycroft warned Holmes to be careful with the 2 representatives from the insurance company. Their purpose wasn't actually to be allies in protecting the jewel, but to exterminate monsters. What they were targeting was the safe that could suppress werewolves rather than the jewel inside. Afterward, they would chase him to retrieve the box, but still blame Lupin for taking it. Hearing this plan, Holmes remained confident that he would still retrieve the jewel. But Mycroft, just as he was leaving, frankly asked if he planned to use Barisu. In a disadvantageous situation, Watson and Holmes discussed whether they could trust the 2 Eastern detectives, considering the case where they would be killed by those 2 insurance company employees. Holmes remembered Rindo's immortality ability. Just then, the person holding Rindo's cage was startled when he discovered her and dropped her head straight onto the road. Suddenly, a carriage rushed by, crushing her head into 2 pieces. The two petty thieves from before returned and saw her regenerating from the two halves of her head. Rindo gently asked them for a ride, but these two, with scheming faces, forced her onto the carriage. At that moment, Shizuku's carriage passed by, catching a glimpse of her mistress's head rolling behind the carriage. Shizuku, along with Lupin and Eric, swerved to pursue. At this time, Shunichi and Annie had just arrived at the empty cage. As soon as he saw the carriage carrying Rindo's head and Shizuku's carriage chasing after it, our protagonist quickly jumped onto a rooftop to chase both. Annie also quickly borrowed an old man's bicycle to join the race. Not long after, Shunichi caught up, jumping straight down onto the thieves' carriage, putting Rindo back into the cage. The two petty thieves fell straight to the ground just as Shizuku's carriage arrived. Seeing the maid Shizuku's face, the two thieves abandoned their loot and ran for their lives. Annie pedaled to the scene to help hold Rindo's birdcage. Rindo glanced at Lupin, asking who he was, but Lupin said he wasn't worthy of naming himself. However, the immortal, based on the outfit identical to Holmes's, immediately guessed that he was Lupin, just as Lupin, hearing the names of those present, guessed they were the birdcage messenger. Lupin smiled mysteriously, saying today was indeed an interesting day, meeting both detectives sent to catch him, and introduced Eric. He asked about the two people beside Rindo, the maid Shizuku and the demon slayer Shunichi. Shunichi confidently asserted that the demon slayer was stronger than even Lupin. Hearing this, Eric threw a bag of rainbow marbles. Lupin quickly stepped on them to play with Shunichi. But instead of shooting marbles as usual, Lupin glided on the marbles, controlling them with extreme skill, approaching to attack Shunichi. Shunichi thought he would easily fall as usual. Just as he was about to respond, Lupin hit him with 3 marbles to the head. This blonde thief also added a punch that knocked Shunichi out on the spot. Lupin smiled lightly, warning Rindo not to get involved in this matter anymore, then got in the carriage and left. But instead of being intimidated, Rindo became even more confident, going to Forza's house and saying this was preparation for the upcoming farce. Instead of going down to the basement with Holmes and the other guards, Rindo's group chose to go up to the watchtower to keep watch. The 2 representatives from the insurance company wanted to go up to the ground level to protect, but were immediately mocked by Holmes, asking if it was to make it easier for Lupin to take the stone. The 2 insurance employees insisted that they only wanted to protect the assets, then walked away. After confirming with Mr. Phileas that the stone was still in the safe, the guards began to close the basement door. 5 people sat around the box. 50 minutes before the appointed theft time, a loud sound from the main hall attracted many guards to look. In the basement, Holmes drew his gun and shot straight at all the locks on the door. He knew Lupin could open any kind of lock, so if there were no locks to begin with, Lupin wouldn't be able to open them. At 10:55, very tense, Mr. Phileas asked Watson and Holmes to hold the safe with their hands. The clock ticked, and now it was 11 o'clock. An earthquake shook the entire room, and spring water poured down from the ventilation hole. Holmes began to be at an impasse when he couldn't escape or protect the safe underwater. Holmes had fallen into Lupin's trap through the statement about being able to open any kind of lock, and now he couldn't escape from the room that was gradually filling with cold water. The guards ran up to ask the 2 insurance employees for help in breaking down the basement door. Number 5, Renho, assigned number 7, Fatima, to go down and help, while he would stay to continue the mission. Number 5 shot arrows that penetrated the sturdy gate, helping to create large holes for the water to flow out. The deformed gate collapsed, allowing the room to drain all the water, saving the lives of those inside. When the room was drained of water, the box had already disappeared, and it was exactly 11:30 p.m. This also marked the inspector's 11th defeat against this master thief. In the impasse, Fatima suggested that if they blocked the escape route at the bridge, they would have a chance to catch Lupin, as in such a sealed room, the master thief might not have been able to escape yet. The group walked across the bridge while Holmes was still deep in thought. In the living room, everyone was covered with warming blankets when suddenly Holmes pinned the inspector down and handcuffed him. To everyone's surprise, Holmes explained that this fat inspector walked very lightly on the bridge because his belly was fake. The fake inspector was quite surprised that Holmes could recognize him when from the beginning, he had planted the idea in Holmes's mind that he had disguised his nose and chin. Besides recognizing his identity, Holmes had also tricked him by saying the diamond was still in the safe in the room. But actually, the real safe had been taken out to the street by the maid in the morning, and the diamond was in a medicine box in Watson's pocket. Watson searched his pocket, but strangely, there was no medicine box. It was in Lupin's hand. The handsome thief waved his hand, and the room flashed with golden light. He escaped to the glass greenhouse to meet his assistant Eric, who was carrying the silver safe in his hands. At this point, Shunichi was still telling a story about Ishikawa Gomen, a notorious thief who was boiled to death, causing his brothers to seek revenge by stealing everyone's pots in the city. A bean seller, fearing his pot would be stolen, slept inside it and didn't sleep, eventually catching the robbers. And just like this story, when the silver safe was opened, Rindo's head was lying there, shouting, "They're here." At this moment, our protagonist also determined the position and lunged straight at the two handsome thieves. It turned out that in the afternoon, Lupin had mistaken Annie for the birdcage messenger, so he couldn't have imagined she could fit into the safe. Knowing Lupin's misunderstanding, Rindo instructed Shunichi to pretend to lose. Now Lupin was in a tight spot, fighting 1 against 2. Eric ran away on all fours, but the situation became even more dire with the appearance of another dangerous character. Number 5. Renho. He counted to himself, 1 master thief, 2 monsters, and 1 diamond 1/ for each, and the diamond would be taken away. Suddenly, there was another bomb that exploded, collapsing the bridge and trapping everyone. Lupin immediately clarified that it wasn't his doing. Of course, it wasn't Lupin's, but rather that of a group led by the old man with a baton marked with the letter M. They quickly knocked out a group of guards, causing the rest to flee in chaos. The group consisting of the earring-wearing brother Elator, Lady Camilla, Victor, and Jack, followed the old man with the baton into the battle. They massacred all the guards. This evil group divided their tasks very clearly. Jack in the east, Victor in the west along with Professor Baton, Alistair and Camilla as bait. As soon as the group began to follow the plan, only Elator and Camilla remained. A group of guards entered, warning them. Before they could finish their sentence, the duo dispatched the entire squad. Camilla was annoyed with her dress getting stained with blood. Although she was a vampire, she assigned Elator the western mission while she would go to the east to massacre. After taking just a few steps, Camilla noticed a maid cowering and trembling in a corner. Suggesting she would make the maid feel pleasure until death, she gently bit her neck and drank her blood until she actually died. In the same room with Shunichi, Lupin recognized that someone had entered the mansion illegally, but neither Shunichi nor Renho cared, lunging straight at each other like hungry tigers. Renho thrust a sword straight at Lupin, but Lupin gently dodged, leaving Shunichi standing there. But with his superior martial arts, our protagonist quickly jumped up and gave Renho a kick that sent him flying out. Renho was not to be outdone and quickly regained his momentum, grabbed his sword, and attacked again. Shunichi, while dodging, remembered that he had forgotten that the main character tonight was Lupin. Renho also remembered, rushing to attack Lupin and demand the diamond. The cowardly Lupin held out the diamond, making it seem like everything was over. But then the blonde master thief tossed the diamond straight through a hole in the ceiling. The diamond rolled on the roof while Lupin used his techniques to escape in delight, with Renho and Shunichi chasing after the precious gem. At that moment, Holmes and Watson also arrived, but were mocked by Rindo that they had already arrived 1 step too late. Holmes informed them about the group of 5 intruders, and Rindo asked to be taken along because she knew about this group of 5. Eric was hiding but was discovered by number 7, Fatima. This phantom brother was also on the list of targets, and even if he hadn't revealed himself, Fatima would still have attacked him with her divine crossbow. The arrows narrowly hit, whizzing in the darkness as Eric skillfully dodged. The Phantom of the Opera had just jumped when an arrow struck him directly in the back. On Holmes's side, the situation was also tense, with the corpses of guards lying everywhere. A dying guard called for help but was burned alive. The perpetrator of this cruel act was none other than Elator. He quickly recognized Holmes and Watson but knew nothing about Rindo. Holmes also recognized him as a heretic who called himself a famous magician because of his brutal rituals. Currently, he was participating as a subordinate in this savage organization of 5 people. This madman wasn't really interested in taking the diamond, but was more excited about confronting and killing Holmes. He quickly shot needles towards his opponent. Holmes took a piece of leather and smelled the anesthetic, as well as guessed that he was using weapons from his 2 thumbs. The battle was intense as Elator gleefully wanted to kill Holmes to silence him. In the east, an uncle-like detective met Lady Camilla and gave her a copper candy. The lady returned the shattered copper candy with a wound that healed extremely quickly. Just when it seemed the uncle's fate was sealed, the maid Shizuku rushed in and kicked the lady. After a brief introduction, The emotionless Shizuku asked the uncle if he had seen the phantom Eric. Hearing the answer was no, she asked permission to leave immediately, but was stopped by the quarrelsome lady. Although Shizuku politely asked to leave because she had to follow Rindo's orders to find the phantom, Camilla escalated the situation by threatening to deal with Rindo as well, making it impossible for the maid Shizuku not to join the battle. Regarding the diamond, as soon as Lupin caught it, both Renho and Shunichi couldn't restrain themselves and fought for it in mid-air with affectionate punches and kicks. After a round of martial arts exchange, the diamond flew out of Shunichi's mouth and rolled into a dark corner in the prayer room. Lupin entered the same room with Shunichi, requesting a ceasefire to cooperate in dealing with the unlikable Renho. Shunichi would act as bait, and Lupin would ambush from the second floor. Renho entered, rambling about disinfecting the stone because it had Shunichi's saliva on it, making Shunichi excitedly tell about an old acquaintance who was also excessively clean and mumbled just the same. One day, when that person was walking outside and bird droppings fell on his head, Lupin flipped a huge table that fell straight onto Renho's head, rendering him motionless. But Lupin knew that just that wasn't enough to take down Renho. Similarly, number 7, Fatima, was also at a disadvantage when facing the Phantom of the Opera. She couldn't hear any sound from Eric and was knocked down by his beam attack. He also quickly jumped down with the intention of finishing off Fatima. On this side, Shizuku was having difficulty fighting Camilla. Her tricks couldn't deceive Camilla, but who needs tricks when Shizuku had directly attacked Camilla and turned the tables? Lady Camilla could do nothing but dodge the attacks from the maid Shizuku's bayonet. The maid fired her gun, giving Camilla a silver bullet wound on her shoulder, preventing the lady from recovering anymore. Planning to give Camilla a finishing shot, the situation reversed once again. Shizuku unfortunately allowed Camilla to touch her lips to her body, enabling the vampire lady to use her ability to control others through toxins from her body. The maid could only helplessly watch as Camilla approached, hands intertwined, saying flattering words, wanting to make her a dessert. On a later and Holmes's side, it was an intense gunfight. Bullets and poisoned arrows rained towards the opponent, but Holmes's side was at a disadvantage as they ran out of bullets, while a later showed no signs of running out of needles. While Holmes was discussing a plan with Watson, a later leisurely chatted with Rindo about wanting the diamond because he wanted to find werewolves to recruit more members for this savage gang. Rindo also shared about losing her body, and a later frankly said that her body was at their organization. Before Rindo could say anything more, Holmes rushed in with Baritsu to attack Elater. Elater couldn't avoid it the biter bit, poisoned by his own toxin. Holmes was about to take advantage of this opportunity to finish off Elater when the wall collapsed, and the man with the baton entered Professor James Moriarty. Back to Shunichi, the ceiling of the prayer room collapsed with number 5, Fatima, falling down to join her colleague number 7, Renho, thinking that the appearance of Fatima and Eric was crowded enough. But no, Brother Jack jumped in through the window. With a special ability that made everyone feel like they were drowning in a pool of blood, Jack, without saying a word, aimed to give Fatima several fatal blows. Renho also took a hit, sticking firmly to the wall. Seeing this situation, Lupin and Eric didn't dare stay and stubbornly cling to the diamond anymore, but quickly retreated, leaving Shunichi to face Jack. On this side, Rindo reunited with the one who stole her body, the old man with the baton James Moriarty. He knew everything about her just by observing through the birdcage. Regarding the two people accompanying her, the body of the immortal was in his hands, and he had no intention of returning it because it was a precious specimen. He had established a new criminal organization after 8 years, gathering the most prominent monster types in the world. The large victor quickly placed a chair for the criminal Emperor James so that he could leisurely sit and talk about his reason for returning to build this savage career. A former student of his wanted to implant monsters into his body to have superior strength than humans. This person was none other than Jack the Ripper, who was currently chatting with our protagonist. Just after introducing themselves, both lunged into a brawl. Jack realized he had met Shunichi somewhere before. On the other side, James proudly recounted his inhumane experiments. He came to Japan to hunt 2 rare creatures, demons and immortals. Regarding demons, he successfully implanted hybrid demons, although most specimens couldn't survive. But the experiment still succeeded in enhancing Jack's physical strength. Then he found the only immortal, Rindo, took her body, and implanted it into Jack. But because Rindo was originally an artificial being created from someone else, he couldn't obtain complete immortality, only strong immunity. Next, he successfully implanted vampire traits into Jack to gain regenerative abilities and keen senses. At this point, everyone could understand why he wanted to find the diamond that attracted werewolves. Currently, with a perfect monster like Jack, he was almost invincible, and our protagonist had a hard time fighting back. Despite his best efforts, Shunishi's arm was still torn by Jack, blocking one of Jack's attacks. Shunichi seemed to have a glimmer of hope for victory, but he was still easily thrown several meters by Jack. Jack began to remember Shunichi as his wound on his arm couldn't heal Shunichi with specimen number 9, the only one who escaped after surgery. Shunichi also recognized Jack as the assistant of the perverted old man James. The touching reunion turned cold when Jack heard Shunichi's answer that he came to London to perform in a circus. The striped brother left with the diamond, leaving Shunichi with a mysterious smile. Shizuku was still being groped by the perverted vampire lady. While the lady wasn't paying attention, Shizuku used a small crucifix to stab her in the side, making the battle tense once again. Lady Camilla, angry and wanting to finish off Shizuku who had lost all fighting ability. When red fireworks lit up the entire sky, they were the signal that Jack had successfully obtained the stone. The entire organization smoothly withdrew from the mansion along with their leader, James, who smiled gently and introduced the Night Party organization, saying it was a pleasure to face them. With everything finished, everyone gathered in Mr. Phileas's living room. Shunichi was severely injured but smiled at Shizuku, who was affected by charm poison and feeling shy. Lupin and the Phantom Eric successfully escaped through the canal by calculating the water level. With them was the silver safe that Rindo forgot to bring, a severe defeat for the detectives and Mr. Phileas. On the other side of the battlefield, the Night Party was drinking wine to celebrate their victory in obtaining the diamond. But surprisingly, there was no gem in Jack's pocket. It turned out that Shunichi had shown Jack a professional pickpocketing performance. The gem was returned to its original owner, Mr. Phileas. Everyone together found out why the gem was so sought after by examining it under a UV light. The red text, Forest of Fangs, glowed in the middle of the gem, signaling the bloody battle to come with 3 main characters against the formidable organization, Night Party. 8 years ago, a group of people were chasing monsters in the forest. They drove a werewolf and a girl to the edge of a cliff. The mother and child hid together in a tower. The mother was trying to comfort her child amid the torrents of curses from humans, and the end of that massacre was a fire that burned down the entire tower. Inside was the image of a mother embracing and protecting her child, with eyes full of hatred. Currently, our Shunichi and the 2 beautiful women were on their way to eastern Germany. They were walking to the village of Willendob, which translates to distant scream. Rindo guessed that James's organization was also approaching this village. Shunichi eagerly asked about werewolves, whether Rindo had ever encountered werewolves. Rindo said she met one 150 years ago. Contrary to what everyone thought, werewolves weren't wild beasts but beings with intelligence. Werewolves could communicate well with humans and were extremely good at hiding. They had 3 forms, human, beast, and beast-human, and could transform flexibly. In human form, they weren't much different from normal people and could be attacked with ordinary knives. At this point, Shunichi immediately questioned if there was a form that made them unable to be attacked with ordinary knives. Rindo replied that it was the beast-human form, with keen senses and could be as large as a bear, with skin as hard as steel. Even bullets couldn't penetrate it. Their hunting instinct was extremely strong. They could pursue their enemies to the ends of the earth. Shunichi felt admiration for the powerful abilities of these werewolves. Shunichi wondered if werewolves had any weaknesses. Rindo guessed it was onions because wolves are dogs, like our dogs. As they were walking, they encountered an old man with white hair looking for someone named Louis. In response to Shunichi's greeting, the old man Henneman wasn't very friendly and was about to draw his gun. But when he learned they were detectives investigating monsters, he immediately rushed to ask for help because the village had just had a girl kidnapped by a werewolf. Entering the village of Willendob, the detective group was greeted with wary and uncomfortable gazes. Willendob was a poor village with no school or hospital, rarely visited by guests, and the most special thing in the village was only a majestic waterfall. Rindo asked about the missing person in the village, but it seemed this old man, like many others, mistook Shizuku for Rindo. He slowly recounted about a 15-year-old girl named Nadia, the village chief's eldest daughter, who went missing in the spring. The very next day, her body was found in the forest with severe deformities. He concluded that normal wolves couldn't cause such a tragic incident. It could only be a werewolf. Just 4 months later, The ferryman's daughter named Finn also disappeared, and her body was found in a terrible condition. After another 4 months, a 13-year-old girl, the daughter of a flour mill worker, met a similar fate. All 3 cases occurred on rainy nights when the victims left their homes, and most recently, yesterday was Louis. The girl's screams tore through the night, calling for help from her parents. Her father, Gustave, used a gun to break down the door to find his daughter, but it was too late. The girl had disappeared, leaving only a large pool of blood on the bed and a shattered window. Strangely, it didn't rain last night. After these cases, villagers gossiped that there was a werewolf hiding in the village, as in previous precedents. Rindo wondered if there had been precedents. Old man Henneman slowly recounted that 8 years ago, there had been a werewolf hiding in the village, and he, along with the villagers, drove it away before there were any victims. In the church, sounds of cursing and beating a man named Clack rang out. They were suspecting him of being a werewolf. He was someone from far away who came to the village. Fortunately for him, in the midst of the struggle, Old Man Henneman and the detective group entered. After Shunichi introduced himself and Rindo, the people in the church were curious about what was under the curtain covering the cage. Rindo didn't encourage them to open it because it would frighten them, but the curious crowd still opened it. Everyone was excited, especially Gustave, who even intended to draw his gun to kill Rindo. She smiled lightly, telling him to put the gun down, and she would solve this serial murder case. At the house of the sickly but very intelligent girl Louis, they entered her bedroom. Everything was in ruins, as if it had just gone through an earthquake. Rindo deduced that the killer entered through the chimney because Louis's parents didn't light the stove last night. But the chimney entrance was very narrow for a person to fit through and would only be easy if it was a wolf, along with the animal footprints left behind. Rindo didn't rush to make deductions, but asked Mr. Henneman to get evidence of the tooth marks attacking previous victims for comparison, and also asked him to tell the maid Shizuku to bring her an object the size of a ball from the suitcase. When he left, Rindo turned back to interview the mother. The girl could get in and out of the wheelchair herself. The mother had tucked her in the night before and locked one side of the window. The broken window was originally fixed and couldn't be opened. Just as she was asking this, the maid Shizuku arrived. She helped Rindo observe that there were no footprints on the roof, confirming that the killer could only have escaped through the window. Meanwhile, Rindo observed the chimney base as Shizuku dropped a pillow down from the chimney. Shinichi looked pitifully at his beloved pillow covered in dirt, sighing to Rindo that she should blame Shizuku, but Rindo just gently thanked Shizuku. Old Man Henneman also arrived with a book showing the tooth marks of the old werewolf. The fact that the 2 tooth marks matched made Rindo quite troubled, eliminating the speculation that the killer was imitating the crime. Also, completely contrary to what everyone thought about the tragic case being caused by a werewolf going insane, this werewolf was extremely rational, carrying Louis in a bag. Because the bed was soaked in blood but the path was completely clean, and no blanket was missing from the room, it proved that this werewolf had planned to bring a bag beforehand and deliberately destroyed the room to pretend to be insane. After hearing Rindo's analysis, Louis's father became even more worried about his daughter's safety. But with the evidence gathered so far, Rindo regrettably had to inform him that the possibility of the girl still being alive was very low. Louis's parents could only look on in shock and helplessness as the 3 left for the village chief's house. The aging, troubled village chief said that this village was just a food container for those who climbed up the cliff from under the waterfall hundreds of years ago, hunting at will. He worried that the village would be exterminated. Rindo only cared about whether the werewolves lived under the waterfall. He said according to legend, there was a village under the waterfall called Guppenhaze. Rindo asked back, not the forest of fangs? The village chief eagerly asked if they wanted to hunt werewolves, because if they went down unprepared, they wouldn't be able to meet werewolves. To their surprise, the detective group had prepared the Black Diamond key, but the old village chief still refused to tell them how to find the forest of fangs, forcing Rindo to make a deal that she would find the werewolf within 2 days in exchange for the way into the forest of fangs. On the other side, 2 other representatives from the insurance company, number 4 and number 3, also arrived. Rindo knew that the first victim, Nadia, was the village chief's granddaughter. She asked him what he thought about why the killer only took young girls. He indifferently replied that it must be because the killer liked young girls. Rindo analyzed that the perpetrator's purpose certainly wasn't just for food because he paid close attention to weather and timing. She looked at the village chief meaningfully, asking if he thought the culprit was someone in the village. He didn't hesitate at all, immediately asserting that it wasn't because people in the village were still just normal people. Werewolves had to be born from werewolves. In the village, there were only 3 immigrants: Dr. Henneman, Engineer Clack, and Artist Anma. He had scrutinized them very carefully. Although werewolves in human form were very difficult to distinguish, it wasn't impossible. Placing strong scents or making loud noises right by the ear would make werewolves startle and reveal themselves. He had tried this with the 3 immigrants, and they remained normal. Rindo admired the village chief's knowledge of werewolves. He gently continued that werewolves mate and give birth to children in a way that improves their genes, so the next generation of werewolves is much stronger than the previous one. Now, things like crucifixes or holy water couldn't scare them anymore. To kill them, the only way was to shoot accurately into their eyes and mouth when they were in human form. But if given a little more time, once werewolves achieved the most perfect genome, there would be no way to exterminate them anymore. The werewolves who weren't afraid of silver were the mother and child werewolf from the previous episode. Louis exposed the identity of the daughter, and little Louis became a hero, the protective deity of this village. At Mr. Clack's house, the man who had sheltered Rose, who was pregnant and left home 13 years ago. Rose in human form was truly beautiful and intelligent, making Clack fall for her. One day before the spring festival, Rose mistook Louis for her own daughter picking flowers. She approached and instructed the girl that if she smelled strong flower scents, she shouldn't show her ears and tail. But unexpectedly, this instruction cost the mother and daughter their lives when Louis heard this and curiously tried it with the daughter, Jess. Once discovered, the mother and daughter were chased and burned alive in the tower. The next day, Clack checked and found 2 charred beast human skeletons. Rindo asked Clack who he thought the killer was. He asserted that neither he nor Henneman did it, so it must be the other immigrant, the artist Anma. This young female artist came to the village 5 years ago to paint the waterfall scene. She was a talented artist from an artistic family who had studied at an art school. Her house in the corner of the village was full of paintings of beautiful girls, mostly the victims whose parents asked her to paint memorial portraits for them. When Rindo asked if she suspected anyone, Anma said it might be due to the wolf with the golden fur that she often saw at dawn and dusk. The beautiful wolf lived on the other side of the forest with its distinctive fur, but only she saw it because of her house's location at the village's corner. Rindo quickly discovered 2 points where Anma was lying. No one in her family was an artist, and she had never studied at any art school. The way she held the charcoal pencil like a regular pencil exposed her lie. It was all self-taught. Anma broke the pencil in her hand, smiling and saying that her parents left early, so she felt embarrassed and didn't want to mention it. But her love for drawing was real. She liked to draw things that transformed, and Louis's recent changes made her very happy. The detective group left the artist's house and approached the majestic waterfall, admiring its beauty. Their eyes fell on the burned-down tower. Looking at the tragic traces, Shizuku suddenly asked if Rose left home for this village in the past. Where did she stay initially? Rindo replied that perhaps it was in the werewolf village. From afar, Elater and the night party group were standing, watching the detective group. As night fell, they went to old man Henneman's house to ask about the case that night. Henneman heard Louis's screams, but when he entered, it was too late. Rindo suddenly asked him how Louis's parents treated their daughter. Before Henneman could answer, Rindo analyzed that Louis's wheelchair had quite dirty armrests and foot pedals from frequent use, but the pushing handle was very new. This proved that Louis's parents didn't provide much support for their daughter. She then asked if Louis had ever gone out alone. Henneman recalled that a year ago, when Louis went out alone while her parents were away, the whole village was worried. But after a few hours, they found her wheelchair stuck in a mud puddle. Her parents worriedly asked why she went out alone like that and received the answer that she was going to Sister Anma's house. Henneman guessed that the girl really liked the painting of herself at home and wanted to go to Anma's house to see more. When stuck there, she panicked in fear and lay flat in the house for days afterward. Shunichi at this point was only paying attention to the plate of cookies on the table and couldn't resist taking one to eat. At that moment, Rindo smiled mysteriously, understanding everything. As Shunichi was trying to chew the hard cookie, the sound of 2 people entering was heard. None other than insurance company employees number 3 and number 4. Without even a greeting, the 2 girls immediately attacked those in the room. The dark-skinned man immediately subdued Henneman to let the blonde woman deal with the detective group. But our Shunichi, with more courage than brains, quickly approached the blonde woman while the maid Shizuku carried Rindo to dodge the attacks. The dark-skinned man, number 4, didn't hesitate to body shame Rindo for being ugly, while the blonde woman, number 3, Alice, rattled off her introduction with an irritated attitude. They had been informed of Rindo's group's current location by Holmes. Having barely rested, they had to engage in battle again. The quick-witted Rindo proposed a deal between both sides. If they cooperated with each other, she would also allow these 2 insurance employees to join them in exploring the werewolf village. The blonde Alice was inclined to disagree, thinking they just needed to deal with them and take the stone. But our protagonist quickly stated that without a way down, this diamond would be just like a pebble. They had to wait another day or 2 to fulfill the deal with the village chief before everyone would know how to go down to the werewolf village. With the deal with the 2 insurance employees settled, everyone went back to their respective places. At this point, the maid Shizuku was in an awkward situation, having to watch Rindo and Shunichi kiss. After they finished, she immediately hugged Rindo back into the cage, setting aside the kissing matter. Everyone discussed Louis's case again. Rindo asserted that the clearest clue was the window. Hearing this, Shizuku and Shunichi both stood on either side of the window and witnessed an astonishing scene. Anma's house across the river was surrounded by villagers who were encircling to capture her. Anma inside the house seemed to be going insane. Gustav shouted, asking Anma why she had taken his daughter. The artist replied in panic that she had eaten the girl, and it was very delicious. Gustav, enraged, drew his gun and aimed at Anma, but the artist twisted her body and transformed into a beast-human form. Her large body transformed into a wolf. Alice shot a silver bullet, but it had no effect on her. Shunichi followed along with Shizuku, who used her sharp silver bayonet to stab the werewolf, but it had no effect. Our protagonist then decided to solo against this golden-furred werewolf. Unlike before, Shunichi had to admire the toughness of this beast-human. During the fierce combat, Alice caught up and fired bullets. This quickly attracted the attention of the golden-furred werewolf, creating an opportunity for Shizuku to aim at its eyes, but unfortunately, the bullet missed. The werewolf, still strong, lunged at Rindo's cage. The maid didn't delay a second, rushing after it and using the silver bayonet to catch the cage and throw it back onto the shore. The wolf quickly escaped, but our beautiful maid lost her balance and fell straight down the towering waterfall, leaving Shunichi and Rindo screaming helplessly. The scene changes to an image of a girl sitting on a cast iron pan placed on a wooden platform. An old woman called her a nun, and the fact that she had a huge pregnant belly was being accused of attempting to cut off bloodlines. The old woman said they could only take refuge in this village, but she argued that she could live anywhere, and if they only lived in this village, they should all have been extinct. Before she could finish her argument, the old woman knocked hard, causing all the wooden beams to clatter down, and the young girl fell from above. Back to Shunichi's group. The whole group, having lost Shizuku, was not happy, and Alice even intended to eliminate them because she thought the village chief had deceived the 3 main characters. Just then, dawn broke again, illuminating the path ahead, creating the beautiful scene of the forest of fangs. Shunichi took out the diamond to examine it, and they all headed towards the forest of fangs. Not just the 4 of them, but the night party also began to act. The fortunate maid Shizuku woke up next to a beautiful person and a red wolf. A blonde girl named Nora entered, saw that Shizuku was awake, and woke up the 2 sleeping with her. In a flash, the red wolf transformed into a beautiful red-haired woman named Vera. The gentle sister Kara also woke up. Vera wanted to call someone named Quinn, but Nora disagreed because the little girl knew Shizuku wasn't the culprit, the one who used a handgun to commit the crimes. But currently, they still confiscated her weapons. Nora had saved Shizuku when they were preparing to sleep at noon, bringing her back and asking her 2 friends who were napping to warm her up. Shizuku wondered why they called it napping when it was midnight. Nora gently explained that the night of humans was the day for them. They were werewolves, and Shizuku was in the werewolf village. The village was involved in a serial killing that occurred on rainy days. Hearing this information, Shizuku introduced the monster investigating detective, Rindo the birdcage. The 3 girls excitedly asked where Rindo was, but as soon as Shizuku said Rindo was coming from the human village and would be here soon, the 3 girls immediately showed vigilance and discomfort. They even had the intention of driving her away, but seeing the common interest in tea, Shizuku immediately showcased her tea-making talent. The girls were delighted with the delicious new tea that the maid made and opened up to tell Shizuku about the case. Beginning a year ago, on rainy days 4 months apart, 3 girls were consecutively killed with a pistol to the front of the face. The wild beast gang, the men in the village, searched for the culprit but couldn't find them because the rain washed away the scent of the perpetrator. All the victims were girls who showed signs of being dazed before being killed. Shizuku asked about the gunshot sound because the maid had never heard of a handgun that didn't make a sound, and she also specifically asked why no one could smell if there was really an intruder in the village. Nora was quite annoyed, asking what she meant, but Shizuku didn't answer and asked permission to leave. However, the other two girls didn't agree because they feared Shizuku would be captured by the wild beast gang. They discussed finding a water source to erase Shizuku's scent for an easy departure. The plan was set. Shizuku would go to the lake in the east, while Nora would lead the wild beast gang to the west to avoid confrontation. The red-haired sister and the black-haired sister hid Shizuku in a pile of dry grass and pushed her to the east. They began to chat about how the girls here had never left the village, and if they left, they would be caught by the wild beast gang. This was because they were priestesses. All girls over 13 were priestesses, would wear a collar as a mark, and follow the orders of the old village chief. Nora had run to the werewolf village at the age of 4, and next week, Nora would also become a woman. As they were talking, they suddenly saw the wild beast gang in front of them, contrary to the original plan. Seeing this, Kara immediately improvised, saying that she wanted to make a sofa, so she was carrying a lot of dry grass. And just as she was about to leave, one of the members of the wild beast gang immediately poked a stick into the wheel, causing the cart to flip over, exposing that Shizuku was inside. Our group of people immediately smelled the human scent and transformed into werewolves to fight. Shizuku flexibly jumped backward to avoid all enemies. The cool maid immediately grabbed a broom to counterattack the large werewolves. Like a dance in the air, Shizuku gently landed. But this landing was right in the center of the village. Shizuku was surrounded by the entire werewolf village, forcing her to drop her weapon and accept her fate. The gang leader, Quinn, began to question Kara and Vera. Shizuku answered for the two frightened girls, saying she had come to investigate the werewolf village. Seeing the two girls pushing dry grass, she had crawled in to hide. But Quinn quickly exposed this lie because the maid was wearing the village's attire. Before they could resolve this, the old village chief Rhea arrived. She didn't listen to anyone's explanation and immediately decided that Shizuku must die. But Vera managed to stop her by saying that Nora had saved Shizuku. This statement seemed to sway the village chief. She paused, not immediately ordering the killing, but interrogated the maid first. The form of interrogation in this village was also quite strange. They made Shizuku sit on a pot and a wooden platform. If she lied, the wooden floor would collapse, and the detection of her lying was based on the judgment of the old village chief. This was called the wooden hill, used only for those who committed serious crimes. The village chief began the interrogation, asking for her name. The maid clearly replied, "Shizuku." She asked why she came here. She replied it was by accident. The old woman banged her staff hard on the ground, and someone immediately came to remove several wooden beams from the platform. Shizuku swayed, and suddenly a giant cage fell, covering her inside. That was the psychological cage, the cage of fear. The old woman continued to ask about Shizuku's purpose in coming here, suggesting she was the culprit. Kara and Vera stood up to defend her, saying she wasn't the perpetrator because Nora said she used a different type of gun than the culprit. This made the village chief interrogate further. Why did Shizuku bring a gun here? Shizuku tried to explain, but the old woman had another wooden beam removed. Nora and Kara stood up again, saying that Shizuku's master could help solve the case, but the village chief didn't want human help. Shizuku said her master wasn't human and would come soon to help them find the culprit. But before receiving a response, news arrived. The smell of gunpowder and blood rose up. Nora had died on the other side of the forest while it wasn't raining. The old village chief and everyone went to the site. She was heartbroken by the death of the beautiful little Nora. The others tried to sniff out traces. They smelled human blood. But the trail broke off at a place not far away, so they couldn't follow the perpetrator. The village chief accused Shizuku, but everyone knew it certainly wasn't her. The other two girls, with tears in their eyes, asked the detective what she would do in this situation, begging her to help them. Shizuku, moved, began to participate in solving the case. She realized that Nora wasn't killed here, but was dragged here because there was no blood splatter. Additionally, Nora had been immersed in water before being dressed and brought here, as her body was wet but her clothes were dry. Everyone objected, asking why the gunshot sound came from here, and if so, there should have been 2 gunshots. A fresh mark on a tree trunk was still hot. These clues were found, but Shizuku couldn't solve them. She said if Miss Rindo were here, she would be able to solve it. But the people in the village were extremely irritated and didn't trust her anymore. They decided to kill anyone who infiltrated the village. At this moment, Rindo, along with Shunichi and the 2 insurance employees, had just entered the village while listening to Shunichi rambling and telling jokes. The humor didn't last long as Victor from the night party rushed down. He kicked Alice down a cliff, but fortunately, Kai used his chain skills to pull her back up. Alice quickly regained her composure and fired at Victor, but this man with a body of bronze and iron didn't care at all. Then Victor hugged our protagonist and Shizuku, and they fell down the cliff. One might think there would be another solo battle between our protagonist and Victor down here, but no, they landed peacefully. Rindo gently thanked Victor for saving them from the pursuit of the 2 insurance employees. Shunichi was about to pick her up and leave when Victor picked him up instead and asked where the werewolf village was. But Rindo didn't want to tell because the 2 were fighting. She asked for a ceasefire until they met Shizuku again. Victor also requested the diamond as collateral and asked why Shunichi blamed him for arriving too late. Shunichi played dumb and left. Victor lay down to enjoy the fresh air and took a nap. In the village, Nora's funeral was held in a mournful atmosphere. Shizuku was imprisoned and could only look through a small window. In the forest, the beautiful Vera, in wolf form, was sunbathing when she met our protagonist and Rindo approaching. Vera quickly went up to them. Seeing the characteristics that Shizuku had described, a blue-haired person accompanying a human head, Vera immediately recognized that this was Miss Rindo, the detective that Shizuku had mentioned. Vera had prepared a handkerchief to mask the human smell for Shunichi and led them to meet Shizuku. The reunion was quite touching. Rindo gently asked if her maid was injured anywhere. Shizuku replied that she was fine and praised Shunichi for being very useful this time. Shunichi asked her to reward him too, but she said no. Outside, the wild beast gang smelled an unfamiliar scent and immediately guessed that Rindo had arrived, so they returned to the prison. On this side, Rindo asked if there was an artist named Anma in the village and was surprised that there was no such person. Knowing that Shizuku still hadn't been released because she could cause the wild beast gang to discover them, they had to leave Shizuku behind to go investigate the crime scene. Running deep into the forest, they could still hear howling sounds close behind. Rindo asked Shunichi if he had candles. Shunichi replied that he only had an oil lamp. Rindo said that would work for her plan. Passing by the tree that had been shot, Rindo asked Shunichi to help her look at the bloodstains and walk around a strange rock. The wolf pack arrived, but Rindo wasn't in a hurry at all, just telling Shunichi to feel around the rock. The wolf pack arrived but didn't see anyone because Shunichi and Rindo had managed to get down into the cave due to the female detective's accurate deduction. The fact that no gunshot was heard and that werewolves couldn't smell the culprit certainly meant there was a soundproof, sealed place. Following the blood trail, they found an old-style handgun, which was Gustav's missing gun, along with a bloody bag, presumably the bag used to transport the victim. Going further along the blood trail, a series of night butterflies, seeing the light, swarmed around them, leaving a thick layer of powder dust on their bodies. Shunichi saw a strange pool of blood, and Rindo explained that if someone stood from above and shot down at a sleeping person, it would create a mark like this. In another corner of the cave was a simple sleeping place along with some personal items. Different marks 551 days and the words, postpone execution, were carved near the base of the wall. On this side, Louis's body was found in the human village. In the cave, the 2 detectives also found Anma's body with a fatal wound to the neck. Rindo smiled mysteriously. It seemed the 2 cases were closely linked. Reaching the end of the cave, they emerged right at the burned tower from before, taking only 2 hours. Mr. Henneman encountered them and informed them about the discovery of Louis's body. At this point, Rindo frankly exposed the fact that Louis's parents had abandoned their child before she became the village's deity. Even on the day Louis was picking flowers in the forest and met Rose, it was because her parents wanted to get rid of the burden and abandoned her in the forest. The little girl had to expose Jess to prove her usefulness to be adopted by her parents, as well as to hide the fact that her parents had abandoned her, preventing Jess from exposing it. Understanding the case, Rindo said they should return to the village. They went back to the cave to return to the werewolf village, but unexpectedly, the 2 insurance employees saw everything. They decided to follow, bringing along the entire human village with weapons to exterminate all werewolves. Vera discovered that Shizuku's gun was missing. She offered to watch the prisoner so a member of the wild beast gang could go look for it. But of course, that was just a ruse. Vera led our protagonist and Rindo down to free Shizuku and return her gun. Meanwhile, Kara was stunned when in the weaving room, everyone had fainted, and the vampire lady was approaching to control her, making her pass out. The Wild Beast gang discovered the trick, and Quinn decided to deal with the whole main team. On the night party team, Victor and Elator were leisurely chatting, while Shunichi wasn't leisurely at all, having to handle 3 strong wolves by himself. But true to the main character's strength, not just 3 but even 30 wolves wouldn't be a problem for Shunichi. He gave each wolf an affectionate punch, causing all 3 wolves to faint. On Rindo's side, just by not hearing the wolf howl, she knew her plan had succeeded. Vera began to smell a strange scent from the east. This scent must be blood. When the 2 insurance employees were happily satisfied with massacring the werewolf villagers, they led the entire human village to attack and massacre the werewolf village without restraint, even burning the village. Mr. Henneman was shocked, as if experiencing déjà vu, seeing the scene of forcing the wolf mother and child to death by fire as before. But the villagers and those 2 insurance employees weren't the only enemies. Victor and Elator didn't hesitate to send dozens of werewolves to meet their ancestors. Village Chief Rhea, in fear, gathered everyone to act as a pack. At this point, Rindo also ordered Shizuku to find Kara, while she herself would work with Vera. Shizuku arrived at the weaver's house to find Kara affected by charm poison and unconscious, while Lady Camilla was satisfyingly sleeping on a pile of silk. On Shunichi's side, he also met Victor and the insurance employee Kai, predicting an intense combat. Alice immediately encountered Elator. Lady Camilla stretched her stomach, opened her eyes, and upon discovering our maid, both screamed each other's names like in a superhero movie and then lunged into combat. On this side, insurance employee number 4 also met Victor. Kai delivered just 1 blow, and Victor was immediately disabled. Fortunately, Shunichi rushed in to help. Kai chained Shunichi's leg, thinking this match was won, but Victor tore off his arm and threw it at him. Seizing the opportunity as Kai staggered, Shunichi delivered a wind-cutting kick, sending the insurance employee flying straight into a tree trunk, collapsing and unable to fight further. Shunichi demanded the diamond back, and Victor was very cooperative in returning it. Our protagonist sat down to ask about Rindo's body, and Victor also gently said that it was still intact and very well preserved, and that body was at the headquarters in London, very welcoming them to come fight for it back. On Alice's side, she seemed to be at a disadvantage against Elator's endless needles, but with her intelligence, she immediately thought of a plan to throw a shovel up and shoot at it. The redirected bullets seemed to hit the target. The hat-wearing man on the other side had fallen. On Shizuku's side, the silk battle with Lady Camilla was also extremely tense. She used a slash to destroy all the beautiful silk. Having learned a hard lesson, Shizuku was extremely cautious of Camilla's charm poison. Seemingly aware of this, Camilla told Shizuku that being bitten once would make her immune to her charm poison. Shizuku was doubtful and didn't fully believe it, so she fought very cautiously. But the decisive maid wanted to settle the grudge with the vampire lady, so she spread the blanket and fired a shot at Camilla. Camilla also managed to give Shizuku a clean wound across her thigh, but true to the vampire lady's words, Shizuku was unaffected. However, the werewolf girls, with their minds clouded by charm poison, followed Camilla's orders and wrapped around Shizuku, causing her to fall and lose her ability to fight. Meanwhile, Camilla, with a non-fatal wound, left, promising a rematch to the death. As for Alice, she triumphantly went to check the body of the hat-wearing man on the other side. Lifting the hat, surprisingly, the man wasn't Elator. The real Elator gave her a poisoned needle to the neck and smiled in victory. The werewolf village was engulfed in flames. They had cornered the human villagers. Shizuku, Rindo, and Vera arrived at the meeting point of the 2 villages, while Shunichi was assigned a different mission. Rindo confidently exposed the culprit. The hidden perpetrator also revealed herself the golden-furred wolf, also known as Nora from the werewolf village, as well as Louis from the human village, and was actually Jess who had survived the fire years ago. Louis's disappearance was self-staged. The room not being covered in dust proved that the culprit didn't jump in from the chimney, meaning the culprit couldn't have broken into the room. The disappearance of a person and a wolf, where the wolf didn't break in, could only be because Louis, who was originally a werewolf, had switched identities to perform this act. Knowing that Louis was Jess, Rindo deduced from the fact that the wolf teeth disguised as Anma were identical to the marks left by the fake Louis, and to impersonate Louis someone who looked exactly like the little girl, only Jess could do it. Next, what about Nora's body last night? The night butterflies in the cave were very sensitive. But the blonde girl's body discovered in the werewolf village last night didn't have any butterfly powder on her clothes. This proved that the killer acted in darkness, and the one with the ability to operate well in the dark could only be a werewolf, and the werewolf who caused Louis's disappearance or the werewolf who killed Nora in the darkness could only be little Jess. The body found yesterday was Louis's, someone who looked exactly like the surviving Jess, or the current Nora. This deduction was based on the fact that the real Louis had been in the cave, with marks carved near the base of the wall, and only carved in a short range because Louis couldn't stand up and walk. Combined with the strange blood stain from a gunshot from above at Louis lying down, it could be deduced that Nora's body yesterday was actually Louis. Nora had immersed Louis in water to mask the scent, then dressed her and shot the disabled girl, finally pouring her own blood over her to deceive the werewolf tribe. For Louis's final case, she used Nora's body from the werewolf village, brought it to the human village, and bit and tore the body to deceive that Louis had been attacked and killed by a werewolf, simultaneously hiding the gunshot wound. To verify this, Rindo and Vera had exhumed Nora's grave for inspection. Opening the coffin lid, they found it empty inside. In response to Rindo's accusations, Nora said nothing except that she didn't tear, just bit a few times to pretend. The cause of these tragedies began long ago. 13 years ago, Rose, Jess's mother, escaped from the werewolf village due to bizarre rules. 8 years ago, Rose, Jess's mother, died in the fire, but the small corpse was that of a fox living in the tower. Jess survived and returned to the werewolf village with the name Nora. The little girl didn't stop harboring hatred for the werewolf villagers who made her mother leave, as well as the human villagers who killed her mother, so she planned day and night. A year and a half ago, the incident of Louis getting lost was because Nora substituted herself in. The real Louis was taken down to that secret cave. Down there, Louis didn't hate the life in the cave at all, very happily joining Nora in taking revenge on the village that had rejected her. Over time, she lived both under the name Nora and under the name Louis. During the day, she was Louis. At night, she was Nora, due to different living times and rapid movement between the two villages through the tunnel. After half a year of learning and acting, Nora began the first case. All the cases targeted little girls to bring great animosity between the two villages, and the final case was Louis's kidnapping and Nora's death. The little girl created the scene of Louis's kidnapping to erase the culprit's traces, but unexpectedly, Rindo arrived, so she had to change her plan and find someone to substitute as the culprit. The chosen person was Anma, the artist who had been killed but was then impersonated by Nora, who transformed into a wolf. Afterward, little Nora escaped and saved Shizuku. To prevent Shizuku from being falsely accused of the crime in the human village, the girl deliberately had Shizuku captured and created the fake death of Nora in the forest so that the maid would have an alibi. Nora said this was to thank Shizuku for the cup of tea. Rindo further deduced that Nora did this to make the two villages hate each other deeply. Then she opened the gate to cause them to fight and massacre each other, taking revenge on both villages. Nora interrupted, saying that Rindo still couldn't reach the final purpose of the story, and turned her back to bid farewell to the village. Village Chief Rhea cried out in anguish, begging the werewolf king to ask Nora to return. Nora entered the cave and immediately encountered Shunichi, who was on a mission to catch her with a chain. She asked him to step aside, but when refused, threatened to kill him, but the playful Shunichi just liked to block her way. With the strength of the werewolf king, the little girl extinguished all the candles in an instant. The battle in darkness favored Nora, but Shunichi, with his special talent for playing dumb, quickly chained her when she shed her fur. Rindo arrived and asked for the girl to be released. The female detective apologized for misinterpreting her purpose. It turned out that Nora had captured human girls who looked similar to werewolf girls, deformed them, and faked their deaths in the human village. Because she wanted to change the fate of those girls, not wanting them to become priestesses' reproductive tools for breeding stronger lineages. Before her fate also became as tragic as that, she had managed to free 3 girls. Sympathizing with the fate of women trapped in cages, Rindo let Nora go. Shunichi asked Rindo if she deliberately took longer to solve the case to teach the two villages a lesson. But receiving no answer, he asked further what she thought would become of the two villages. Rindo replied that they would just return to how they were. She had witnessed too many things to know the next outcome. Shunichi shouted in the trendy shouting style that was being circulated down the mountain, along with the breaking dawn, as if awakening all the humans and monsters in the film.